and darkness swallowed him. The announcer's voice faded, leaving only a pulsing ring in his ears. Asher abruptly opened his eyes. Could it be? He blinked, trying to focus on the dim light of the fluorescent bulbs piercing through the haze of pain. His head throbbed as if a bell were ringing inside it. His throat burned as if it were being scraped with sandpaper, the cold tiled floor of the bathroom. The smell of bleach and something else, more repulsive, hit his nostrils, twisting his stomach into a tight knot. He swallowed, feeling nausea and the metallic taste on his tongue. I lost consciousness. That thought pierced him, cold and sharp as a blade. He, Asher Hayes, brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, son of Mark Hayes, a legend in mixed martial arts, had just been choked unconscious in a school bathroom. The humiliation burned more fiercely than the pain in his throat. It seeped into every cell of his body, poisoning him, turning him into something fragile and insignificant. Voices, distant, panicked. They sounded as if they were coming from underwater. What if he's seriously hurt? It was Mike, his voice trembling like a string ready to snap. If any teacher finds out, that was Kyle, always cowardly, always thinking of his own skin. His words were choppy, filled with hidden panic. Shut up, Brett. There was none of his usual arrogance in his voice, only an unfamiliar, almost childlike fear. That sound, that break in his voice, was almost as shocking to Asher as his own awakening. Asher slowly rose, leaning on the cold porcelain of the toilet. His muscles ached, every joint protested. The room spun for a moment, as if he had been caught in a whirlpool, but he steadied himself. His legs seemed to regain firmness for the first time in a long while. He looked at the three guys standing over him. Their faces were a mix of their former arrogance and a new, unfamiliar uncertainty. Fear read in their eyes, pure, genuine fear that reflected in his own. But now that fear was foreign, not his own, this ends now. That thought was solid as a rock. It was neither a plea nor a hope. It was a statement, and it was just the beginning. Asher Hayes' life before moving to Northwood High was different, completely different. He grew up in a small town in the Midwest where everyone knew each other and doors were rarely locked. There he was just Asher, the son of Mark and Sarah Hayes. His father, Mark, was a local legend. A former mixed martial arts fighter, he opened his own jiu-jitsu studio, turning it into something more than just a training place. It was a community center where kids and adults learned not only techniques, but also discipline, respect, and self-control. Asher started training at the age of 7. He remembered the smell of old mats mixed with sweat and something else he associated with home and safety. He remembered how his father, a huge but gentle man, taught him the first moves, patiently explaining every hold, every throw. For Asher, jiu-jitsu was not just a sport, it was a language, a way to understand the world and himself. He was good, very good. By the age of 15, he earned a brown belt, which was an extraordinary achievement for his age. He participated in local tournaments, winning most of his fights, but always respected his opponents, adhering to the principles his father taught him. His best friends, Jake and Emily, were just like him, a bit introverted, preferring books and board games to loud parties. They often gathered at his house, played video games, read comics, discussed their dreams. Asher felt safe, surrounded by people who understood him. He had never faced bullying. In his town, where everyone knew Mark Hayes, no one dared to bully his son. But then everything changed. Asher's mother, Sarah, a talented hospital administrator, received a job offer that was too good to refuse. It was a managerial position at a large hospital in the suburbs of a big city, an hour's drive from the metropolis. It meant moving, a new school, a new life. Asher remembered that conversation. He was sitting at the kitchen table when his parents announced the news. "We understand this is hard, son," Sarah said, her voice soft but resolute. "But it's a huge opportunity for me, and for all of us. It's a new start." "We'll find a great studio for training, Asher," Mark added, trying to encourage him. and we'll keep training together. Asher nodded, but a knot twisted in his stomach. He was scared of the unknown, of losing what he knew. He was confident on the mat, but in real life, he was a quiet, somewhat awkward teenager. He didn't know how to easily make friends, how to fit into new groups. Before they left, his father had a long talk with him. They sat in the studio. After the last practice, the smell of sweat and old mats lingering in the air. "Remember, Asher," Mark said, his voice serious, "you are strong, but strength isn't just about fists. It's control. Control over yourself, over your emotions. And you promised me. No fighting at school unless your life is in danger." "My career ended because of a street fight, not in the ring. I don't want you to repeat my mistakes. One fight can cost you your future." "I understand, Dad," Asher replied, his voice quiet. He had made a promise that now felt unbearably heavy. 3 months ago, the bell, sharp and piercing, signaled the end of Mr. Davis's class. Its sound sliced through the silence of the classroom like a clap of thunder. But for 15-year-old Asher Hayes, it was merely a signal for the beginning of his daily trial. He shrank in his seat in the last row of history class, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. His tall, lanky silhouette and unruly chestnut hair made him noticeable against his will, like a beacon in the fog, drawing attention to someone who wanted to be invisible. He was the new kid at Northwood High School, located in a quiet suburb where everyone seemed to know each other since kindergarten, their lives intertwined in a tight knot of friendships and acquaintances. His family had moved here just 3 months ago, and each day was a test of endurance, a trial of his patience and determination. His angular and awkward physique seemed to scream, "Easy target," and unfortunately, some students at Northwood heard that call. Asher slowly, methodically gathered his books, stacking them into his backpack as if each textbook weighed a pound. His fingers were nimble, accustomed to the precision of movements on the mat, but now they trembled with hidden tension. He hoped the usual bullies would leave the classroom before he had to cross the hallway, which during peak hours turned into a rushing river of bodies, where it was easy to get lost, but even easier to be noticed, shoved out of the flow like a splinter. "Hey, skinny, waiting for everyone to leave so you don't get bent in half in the hallway?" The taunt slipped from Brett Harrison's lips, the self-proclaimed king of the sophomore class. His voice was low with a slight rasp that seemed to amplify his authority. Brett was the embodiment of a stereotype, about 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular build like a wrestler. He radiated an aura of superiority that seemed to make others retreat, as if he were the center of gravity. From day one, he had chosen Asher as his target, as if it were his birthright, his privilege. Behind him, like loyal shadows, stood 2 of his lackeys. Kyle, nearly as tall as Brett but leaner, with a sharp, predatory gaze, and Mike, stocky with a bull neck, always ready to impress Brett with increasingly cruel behavior. "Just ignore them," Asher's inner voice whispered. 4 more classes, and you'll be free for the weekend." He kept his gaze down, focusing on the zipper of his backpack, as if the closing of it depended on his life. He heard their footsteps, their laughter, their whispers, but he tried not to react, not to show that he heard them, that he was afraid of them. "I asked you a question, newbie." Brett's hand heavily dropped onto Asher's shoulder, causing him to flinch. The grip was strong, almost painful, and Asher felt the muscles in his shoulder tense up. The sharp, cheap scent of Brett's cologne filled the air, mingling with the smell of old books and dust. "I'm just gathering my things," Asher mumbled, standing up and slinging his backpack over his shoulder. He tried to sidestep Brett, but Kyle, as if on cue, stepped in front of him, blocking his path. The corridor behind them began to fill with students, but no one stopped or intervened. Everyone hurried past, pretending not to notice what was happening. The sounds of footsteps, laughter, and conversations merged into a hum that seemed to drown out his own heartbeat. Mr. Davis, a tall, gray-haired teacher, looked up from behind his desk. His glasses had slipped down to the tip of his nose. "Everything all right back there, gentlemen? You should be heading to your next class." His voice was soft, but there was a weariness in it, as if he had uttered those words hundreds of times before, with the same result each time. Brett's smile was automatic and convincing, meant for adults. "Yes, teacher, we're just helping the newbie find his way." Then he leaned closer to Asher, his voice dropping to a low, threatening whisper that seemed to penetrate straight into his brain. "We'll finish this conversation at lunch, Skinny," he hissed, bumping into Asher's shoulder as he passed by. The hit was not hard, but enough to remind Asher of his place in the hierarchy of Northwood. Asher watched them leave, rubbing his shoulder. He felt a new bruise beginning to form beneath the fabric of his shirt, joining the collection of others that already adorned his body. The bruises were starting to accumulate, like marks on a map of humiliation. But he never fought back. Not because he couldn't. In fact, Asher had spent 8 years training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and had earned a brown belt just before the move. His father, Mark Hayes, was a former mixed martial arts fighter and now an instructor who had trained him personally until they moved due to his mother's new job. Mark was a legend in their small town, known for his technical skill and respect for his opponents. But his career ended after a severe concussion, sustained not in the ring, but in a street fight while trying to protect a stranger. Since then, both parents had been adamant. Fighting was only for self-defense in life-threatening situations or in controlled environments like tournaments. One fight at school could mean expulsion, and since his mother, Sarah Hayes, had finally secured a position in the hospital administration for which they had moved, Asher couldn't risk it. "It's not life-threatening if they're just pushing me," he reassured himself, trying to suppress the growing sense of humiliation. "It's just unpleasant. I can endure it. I have to endure it." The next few weeks felt like a slow torture. Every morning, Asher woke up with a heaviness in his stomach, dreading the day ahead. The sunlight filtering through the blinds seemed mocking. Bullying was not constant, but it was ubiquitous. It was not just physical pushes or trips, but constant humiliations, verbal jabs that slowly but surely eroded his self-confidence, like water dripping on a stone. Tuesday, physical education class, basketball. Despite his height, Asher was awkward and disliked team sports. He preferred individual training, where everything depended solely on him. Brett, being the star of the basketball team, exploited this to his advantage. "Hey, Skinny, pass the ball!" Brett shouted as Asher attempted to dribble. He deliberately crashed into Asher, causing him to lose his balance. The ball slipped from Asher's hands, hitting the floor with a loud thud. "Oops, clumsy!" Mike laughed, his laughter sharp and unpleasant. Coach Johnson, an older man with a perpetually tired look and a whistle around his neck, simply shook his head. "Hayes, be more careful." He didn't see, or didn't want to see, the true reason for Asher's fall. Asher clenched his jaw. He could have easily intercepted the ball, could have dodged Brett, could have even made him stumble without using force. But he did nothing. He just let them, like a mannequin. Wednesday, the cafeteria line. The smell of fried food and cleaning supplies lingered in the air. Asher stood, waiting for his turn, when he felt someone shove him in the back. He nearly fell but steadied himself, his body instinctively tensing. "Sorry, Skinny, didn't see you there," Kyle said, his voice full of feigned innocence, but his eyes sparkled with malice. Asher turned around. Kyle and Mike stood behind him, holding back laughter. Brett stood a little further away, watching him mockingly as if it were a show. "It's fine," Asher mumbled, turning away. He felt his face burning and his ears blazing. Thursday, chemistry class. The smell of chemicals filled the room. Asher was working on an experiment, carefully measuring liquids, when Brett, passing by, deliberately bumped his elbow against him. The beaker tipped over, spilling the caustic liquid onto the table. "Oops, Skinny, you're so clumsy." Brett couldn't hold back his laughter, his voice loud and mocking. Miss Chen, the chemistry teacher, a woman with a stern face and a bun on her head, approached them, her brows furrowed. "What happened here, Brett?" "Asher spilled the reagent, Miss Chen. I was just passing by." Miss Chen sighed. "Asher, be more careful. Clean this up." She handed him a cloth, as if it were his fault. Asher silently wiped up the spilled liquid, feeling anger slowly but surely boiling inside him, like a chemical reagent. He imagined how he could grab Brett, how he could pin him to the table, but he suppressed those thoughts, pushing them deep inside himself. "Hold on, just a little longer. You promised." At night, Asher often couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in his mind, feeling humiliation and helplessness eating away at him from the inside like acid. He missed his old town, his friends who knew the real him, the studio of his father where he felt strong and confident. Here he was, a ghost, a target, someone to be trampled on, and no one noticed, or wanted to notice. He tried to talk to his parents, but every time the words got stuck in his throat. How could he explain to them that he was being humiliated when he himself, with his skills, was doing nothing? He feared disappointing them, feared they would think he wasn't coping, that he was weak. "How's school, Asher?" his mother Sarah asked him at dinner, her voice full of tenderness, which only intensified his guilt. "It's fine, Mom, everything's good," he replied, avoiding her gaze. He saw the worry in her eyes but couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. His father, Mark, sometimes noticed his depression. He saw how Asher was becoming more withdrawn, how his smile was fading. "You look tired, son. Is everything okay?" "Just a lot of studying," Asher lied, his voice flat. He knew his father sensed something was wrong, but Mark respected his space, not pushing, waiting for Asher to be ready to talk. Self-defense doesn't just mean when someone is swinging fists. Standing up for oneself can take many forms. His father's words echoed in his head. But what form? How to stand up for oneself when you're surrounded, when no one intervenes, when the system seems either blind or indifferent? He felt trapped. The cafeteria at Northwood High was a large open space, buzzing with hundreds of voices, food smells, and the clatter of dishes. Rows of rectangular tables were clearly divided by invisible boundaries of social hierarchy. Athletes and popular kids occupied the central tables, their laughter and loud conversations reaching the farthest corners. Others gathered in their respective groups at the edges, like flocks seeking safety in numbers. Asher had no group. He usually sat alone at the far end, near the emergency exit, where he could blend into the background and simply survive the lunch break like a ghost. Today, he kept his head down as he walked through the food line, choosing a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. He paid quickly, feeling the stares on him but refusing to lift his eyes. He turned to head to his usual spot when he caught a glimpse of Brett watching him out of the corner of his eye. Brett was whispering something to Kyle and Mike, their heads bent in conspiracy. A cold stab of fear pierced Asher like an icy needle. He had only made it halfway to his table when he felt something snag at his ankle. It was a light but precise kick, meant to throw him off balance. He stumbled, his legs tangled, and he lost his footing. The tray flew from his hands, and in slow motion, Asher watched as his lunch scattered across the floor. The clatter of the tray hitting the tiles immediately drew attention. The hum of voices in the cafeteria quieted, replaced by dozens of curious gazes. Asher landed heavily on his knees, his water bottle rolling away, and the sandwich crumbled on the floor, its contents spilling out like shards of his dignity. Laughter erupted around him, first timid, then growing louder, turning into outright mockery. Looking back, he saw Mike's outstretched leg quickly retreating under the table as he high-fived Brett. "Oops," Mike exclaimed, his voice full of feigned innocence, but his eyes sparkled with malice. "Looks like the skinny guy is having trouble staying on his feet." Asher's face burned as if he had been plunged into boiling water. He felt the blood rush to his cheeks, and his eyes stung with unshed tears of humiliation. He tried to gather the spilled food, his fingers trembling. A few students giggled, while others, more conscientious, pretended not to notice, burying their faces in their plates as if nothing was happening. Eventually, one of the cafeteria monitors, Miss Jenkins, approached. She was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a voice that seemed weary from constant noise and conflict. "What happened here?" she asked, her tone more of a statement than a question, as if she already knew the answer. Asher knew that complaining would only make things worse. It would only make him an even bigger target, even easier prey. He simply shook his head, not lifting his eyes. Miss Jenkins sighed, as if this was too much for her. "Be more careful next time, Asher." She walked away to deal with a dispute at another table, ignoring the snickers that began to rise again. Asher threw his ruined lunch into the trash and headed to his usual spot. He sat down and pulled out a book, pretending to read while his thoughts raced. Just a few more hours. Just survive today. Just survive this week. Just survive this year. He felt cornered, the hopelessness of the situation weighing down on him. Across the cafeteria, someone was watching the scene with interest. Chloe Miller, a junior with straight, dark hair and piercing eyes, had noticed this pattern for weeks. She had seen Brett and his gang tormenting Asher, how his eyes were always downcast, how he tried to be invisible. Something in her disapproved of it, but like everyone else, she hadn't intervened. Not yet. Chloe Miller was not one to easily succumb to the influence of the crowd. She had been new last year, having moved from a big city, and remembered how hard it was to find her place, how lost and lonely she felt. She had seen how Brett and his gang chose their victims, how they fed on fear and insecurity like vampires. Asher was just the latest in a long line, but something about him was different. She saw his quiet strength, his restraint, which could be either a weakness or something much more than mere passivity. Once, after classes, Chloe was sitting in the library working on her English project. The smell of old books and dust lingered in the air. Asher was at the next table, buried in his textbook, his shoulders tense as if he were bracing for a blow. She heard Brett and his friends passing by, their voices loud, laughter mocking. Asher flinched but didn't raise his head, as if trying to blend in with the furniture. Chloe sighed. She knew she had to do something. Not necessarily intervene in a fight, but at least show that he wasn't alone, that there was someone who saw him, who cared. When the afternoon bell rang, Asher hurried to his locker at the far end of the hallway, hoping to get out before Brett and his friends could intercept him. He was stuffing books into his backpack, his fingers moving quickly, almost feverishly, when a shadow fell over the door of his locker. "Leaving so fast, skinny." Brett leaned against the neighboring locker, his broad back blocking the passage. Kyle and Mike accompanied him like bodyguards, their smirks wide and self-satisfied. "We thought maybe you'd want to hang out with us after school." The hallway quickly emptied. A few students who remained glanced in their direction but hurried past, quickening their pace as if an invisible monster were chasing them. No one wanted to be associated with the target of Brett Harrison's attention. "Seriously, guys, I need to go," Asher said, trying to sidestep them. But Kyle and Mike moved in sync, blocking his way. Mike shoved him back against the lockers, pinning him to the cold, hard metal surface. "Got a hot date?" "Who would date a skinny guy like you?" "Maybe he's running home to cry to mommy?" Kyle suggested, grabbing Asher's backpack and yanking it. Asher held onto the strap, his fingers turning white from the strain, but Brett intervened and yanked it from his grip. "Let's see what the skinny guy has here." He unzipped the backpack and started pulling out books, dropping them to the floor one by one. Textbooks, notebooks, pencils, everything scattered across the dirty hallway floor, as if his life had shattered into pieces. "Stop it," Asher said, his voice now stronger, tinged with desperation, almost a shout. He bent down to pick up the scattered items, but Mike shoved him down, forcing him back to his knees. "And what if I don't?" Brett taunted, holding Asher's math textbook above his head like a trophy. "What are you gonna do about it, newbie?" Asher rose slowly, his palms clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, he contemplated striking, visualizing exactly how he would take Brett down. He could picture the precise sequence of movements, the throw, the hold that would make Brett howl. But he remembered the promise he had made to his parents. Only in life-threatening situations. "Just give me my stuff back," Asher said quietly, his voice tense, but he was still trying to hold back, his body trembling with suppressed anger. Brett seemed disappointed by Asher's restraint. He dropped the textbook, letting it hit the floor with a loud thud. "You're pathetic," he spat. "Skinny isn't even worth our time." They left, leaving Asher to gather his scattered belongings, his heart pounding with humiliation and suppressed rage, as if it wanted to burst from his chest. As he knelt on the floor, he noticed a pair of sneakers stopping next to him. Looking up, he saw Chloe. She wasn't laughing, nor was she passing by. Her eyes were full of sympathy, and there wasn't a trace of judgment in them. "Those guys are idiots," she simply said, bending down to help him pick up the books. Her touch was light, but it carried a genuine kindness that pierced through the armor of his humiliation. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "I'm Chloe," she said, handing him a history notebook. "You know, they pick on you just because you don't fight back. They think you're an easy target." Asher stuffed the last book into his backpack. "Ugh, I'm not going to fight them." "Why not? You look like you could handle it if you wanted to." She looked at him with curiosity, as if she saw something that others didn't, as if she could see through his mask. He stood up, throwing his backpack over his shoulder. Chloe shrugged. "Well, if you ever want to sit with someone during quiet study, I'm usually in the back corner of the library. It'll be harder for them to bother you if you're not alone." She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Asher had seen in Northwood. At that moment, he felt a tiny glimmer of hope, as if a ray of light had broken through the clouds. The weekend flew by too quickly. Asher spent Saturday at his father's small martial arts studio, located in an old brick building on the outskirts of town. The smell of sweat, old mats, and something else that Asher associated with home filled his lungs. In the morning, he helped with the children's classes, watching a small body's awkwardly mimicked movements that had become second nature to him. He saw their enthusiasm, their innocence, and it calmed him a little, distracting him from his own problems. In the afternoon, he trained one-on-one with his dad. On the mat, executing perfect throws and joint locks, Asher felt confident and in control. Everything he lacked at school, here he was not the skinny kid, but Asher, Mark Hayes' student, a person capable of strength and precision. "Your armbar is getting sloppy," his father, Mark Hayes, commented, as they grappled, their bodies entwined in a complex dance. The sound of their breathing filled the studio, mingling with the rustle of the mats. "You're not fully extending." Asher adjusted his position and repeated the move, this time making sure his hips were elevated correctly and his opponent's arm was fully straightened before applying pressure. He felt every muscle, every tendon working in perfect harmony. "Better," his father nodded, tapping out in submission. When they returned to the starting position, Mark looked closely at his son's face. "Everything okay at the new school? You seem a bit distracted today." "Just the usual problems, being the new kid." Asher turned away, not wanting to show his father the full depth of his humiliation. He didn't want his dad to see his weakness, his helplessness. Mark Hayes knew his son well enough to sense that something was off. He noticed the bruises Asher was trying to hide, heard his quiet sighs, and observed his withdrawal, but he didn't press. Instead, he placed a hand on Asher's shoulder. "Remember what I've always taught you. Martial arts are about discipline and respect, not aggression. We use our training only for self-defense when there's no other option." "Yeah, Dad," Asher nodded, repeating words he had heard countless times, but which now took on a new, deeper meaning. "But self-defense doesn't just mean when someone is throwing punches," Mark continued, his eyes serious, wisdom etched in them. "Standing up for yourself can take many forms. Sometimes it means knowing when to walk away. Sometimes it means knowing how to speak up. And sometimes, He paused, his gaze lingering on Asher. Sometimes it means knowing how to show what you're capable of, so that no one dares to cross the line again. Those words echoed in Asher's mind all night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his father's words. Show what you're capable of. But how? How to show it without breaking his promise, without becoming just like them? He felt at a crossroads, torn between the desire to protect himself and loyalty to his principles. On Monday morning, Asher almost convinced himself that things might go better. He woke up with a slight sense of hope that quickly evaporated as soon as he entered the schoolyard. None of those hopes came true. Well, look who we have here, Brett shouted as Asher walked through the main entrance. Brett stood with his legs wide apart, like a territorial owner, while Kyle and Mike flanked him, their smirks broad and self-satisfied. Missed us over the weekend, Skinny? Asher walked on, pretending not to hear, his gaze fixed on the floor. He reached the drinking fountain before Kyle stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Brett's talking to you, Kyle said, crossing his arms, his voice icy. It's rude to ignore people. I'm just trying to get to class, Asher said, attempting to sidestep Kyle. His heart began to pound like a trapped bird flapping in a cage. Mike appeared beside him, blocking any chance of retreat. We were just thinking, Skinny. How long have you been here? 3 months, and we still don't know if you can swim. A cold feeling settled in Asher's stomach. He knew what that meant. He had heard stories about other newcomers that Brett and his gang dragged into the bathroom. It was their ritual, their way of showing power. The bathrooms on the 3rd floor need cleaning, Brett said with a malicious grin, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. And your head is the perfect size for a toilet brush. Before Asher could react, Kyle and Mike grabbed him by the arms. They were stronger than they looked, and their grip on his biceps was like a vice. Brett led them as they half-dragged, half-pushed Asher toward the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. Let me go, Asher struggled, twisting, but their combined strength overwhelmed him. He felt his backpack thumping against his back as they pulled him up the steps. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, amplifying his panic. Not life-threatening, he reminded himself as they shoved him up the stairs. Humiliating, but not dangerous. He clung to that belief like a lifeline, but it was starting to fray, the threads of his patience wearing thin. The bathroom on the 3rd floor was at the end of a less frequented corridor that students rarely used. At this early hour, it was empty, its tiled walls reflecting a silence that felt ominous. Brett pushed the door, checking for anyone inside before nodding to Kyle and Mike. They shoved Asher inside, allowing the door to slam shut behind them with a dull thud that echoed through the tiled room. The smell of mildew and bleach was unbearable, stinging his eyes and throat. Please don't do this, Asher said, his back against a row of sinks as the 3 boys approached him, their shadows ominously falling on the shiny floor like the shadows of predators. No, what's stupid is you thinking you can come to our school and not pay your dues, Brett said, his voice dripping with contempt, as if he were speaking to a lesser being. Every newcomer goes through initiation. They pounced on him together. Asher, despite his panic, managed to evade the first grab, slipping aside as Mike's hand grasped at air. But Kyle was quick, grabbing Asher's arm and twisting it behind his back in an amateur hold that was nonetheless effective due to Kyle's greater strength. I've got him, Kyle declared triumphantly, tightening his grip on Asher's arm. Brett stepped closer, slowly snapping his fingers, his eyes burning with anticipation. I think it's time for the skinny one to learn who's in charge at this school. Asher's training kicked in instinctively. His body tensed. He shifted his weight, preparing to execute a hip throw that could free him. But before he could complete the movement, Mike grabbed his other arm, and together they forced him toward one of the stalls. Wait, Asher began to say, his voice tense, almost pleading, but they weren't listening. Brett silenced him with a hard shove to the chest, sending him stumbling backward into the stall. His heel caught the edge of the toilet, and he lost his balance, heavily sitting down on the closed lid. Perfect, Brett smiled, nodding to his friends. Kyle and Mike tightened their grip on Asher's arms, pinning them to his sides like a vice, leaving him no room to move. Asher felt his heart pounding in his chest like a drum as Brett reached for the flush lever. "First flush," Brett announced, pressing the lever. The toilet gurgled beneath Asher, making a disgusting yet familiar sound. "We need to wet his head to clean it properly." Asher struggled harder now, realizing they were actually going to dunk his head in the toilet. This crossed a line. It wasn't just humiliation, it was desecration. It was something he couldn't allow. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice filled with desperation, almost inhuman, hoping someone outside would hear him, that someone would come to help. "Shut him up," Brett ordered. Mike covered Asher's mouth with his hand while Kyle held Asher's arms in place. Brett leaned down to lift the toilet lid, his grin warm and malicious, as if he was relishing every moment. But Asher wasn't going to let that happen. No more humiliation, no more helplessness. With a sudden burst of strength fueled by anger and adrenaline, Asher jerked his head back sharply, striking Mike hard in the nose. The crack was distinct, and Mike groaned, loosening his grip on Asher's mouth to clutch his face. "You little," Mike began, blood seeping between his fingers, his voice filled with pain and rage. Asher seized the momentary disorientation to wriggle free from Kyle's weakened grip, preparing to escape. He could already feel freedom, but before he could complete the movement, Brett's fist slammed into his stomach. The blow was hard, knocking the air out of Asher's lungs, and he doubled over in pain, his body momentarily failing him like a puppet with cut strings. "Big mistake," Brett growled, grabbing a handful of Asher's hair and yanking his head back, forcing him to tilt it upward. His eyes burned with fury. "Want to play rough? We can play rough." What followed happened so quickly that Asher barely had time to comprehend it. Brett moved behind him, wrapping his arm around Asher's neck in a way that Asher immediately recognized as a poorly executed rear chokehold. In a tournament or during practice, Asher would have easily countered such a move. Brett's technique was sloppy, his arm improperly positioned on Asher's carotid arteries, more on his trachea, making it more dangerous than effective. But with Kyle still immobilizing Asher's arms and Mike recovering from the headbutt, Asher couldn't execute the escape he knew would work. Brett tightened his grip, squeezing Asher's neck with brute force rather than proper technique. "Not so tough now, huh?" he hissed in Asher's ear, his breath hot and foul, like that of a dragon. Asher felt the increasing pressure in his head as the airflow was cut off. His lungs burned, demanding oxygen, but none came. Black spots began to dance before his eyes, first small, then expanding, consuming his field of vision. He thrashed and twisted, trying to break free, but Brett only tightened his grip, his forearm pressing against Asher's throat, cutting off his breath. The black spots widened, engulfing his sight, the world narrowing to a single point, then disappearing. The last thing Asher heard was Kyle saying, "Dude, I think he's passing out," before darkness completely enveloped him. When consciousness returned, it was a slow, agonizing return. Asher wasn't sure how long he had been unconscious. Seconds? Minutes? He lay on the cold, tiled floor of the bathroom, his head throbbing as if a bell were ringing inside it, and his throat burned as if it had been scraped with sandpaper. He blinked, the fluorescent lights above sending needles of pain through his skull. He felt nausea, dizziness, and his body felt foreign, heavy and unresponsive. Damn, he really had passed out. Mike's voice sounded distant, tinged with panic. "What if he's seriously hurt? What if we—" Brett's voice was less confident than usual, a note of fear creeping in. "We need to get out of here," Kyle insisted, his voice tense. "If any teacher finds out—" "Shut up!" Brett growled, but his voice trembled. "No one will find out because the skinny one won't say anything." This was the first time Brett had used his real name, Asher. Not the skinny one, not the newbie. Asher. Asher slowly sat up, leaning against the bathroom stall. The room spun for a moment and then stabilized. He looked at the three guys standing over him. Their faces were a mix of their former arrogance and a new, unfamiliar uncertainty. Fear read in their eyes, pure, unfiltered fear that reflected in his own, but now that fear felt foreign, not his own. Something had changed in Asher. The darkness, the helplessness from being choked to the point of unconsciousness had crossed a line he could no longer ignore. This was no longer just bullying. This was a life-threatening situation his parents had warned him about. This ends now, he thought, and that thought was as solid as a rock, unyielding. With a deliberate calmness that surprised even himself, Asher stood up. The three guys instinctively took a step back, their eyes widening in surprise at his confident movement after what had just happened. They had expected a broken, crying child. They got something else. "You knocked me out," Asher said. His voice was quiet but confident, like the whisper of wind before a storm. "You could have killed me." Brett quickly regained some of his confidence, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "Don't be so dramatic. You were out for just a few seconds." "That's enough," Asher said. Something in his tone made the others exchange glances. A few seconds without oxygen for the brain. He turned his neck, feeling the sensitive spots where Brett's hand had pressed. He felt his body, every muscle, tense up, ready for action. "Whatever," Brett scoffed, though he seemed troubled by Asher's calmness. "Consider it a lesson." "There won't be a next time," Asher interrupted him, his eyes meeting Brett's, and there was no fear or hesitation in them. He took a step forward, and surprisingly, all three guys stepped back another step. "Look at the skinny one, trying to act tough after we just beat him up." Mike's voice was full of familiar mockery, but there was a note of uncertainty in it. Asher's gaze locked onto Kyle with such intensity that the taller boy's smirk faltered. "You know," Asher said conversationally, his voice calm, almost academic, "there's a right way and a wrong way to choke someone unconscious." "What?" Kyle asked, his brows furrowing. "What Brett did. That was the wrong way. It can cause irreversible damage. The right way..." He moved with sudden speed, closing the distance between himself and Kyle before either of them could react. In one smooth motion, the product of thousands of hours of training, Asher executed the perfect throw, driving his shoulder into Kyle's stomach, grabbing both legs and lifting. Kyle's feet left the ground, and he crashed onto his back with a dull thud, while Asher maintained control from the top position. The impact knocked the air out of Kyle's lungs, and before he could recover, Asher transitioned to a mount position. His knees pinned Kyle's shoulders to the floor as he stabilized the technical control position, completely immobilizing him. Kyle thrashed, his eyes wide with shock and pain, but he couldn't move. "What the?" Mike moved forward along with Brett, their faces twisted in anger. "Step back," Asher warned, his voice low but filled with such authority that they hesitated. To Kyle, who was struggling beneath him, Asher quietly said, his voice almost a whisper, but every word was clear. "I could break your arm, dislocate your shoulder, or choke you out properly, but I didn't, because I have control. That's the difference between us." Kyle stopped flailing. His eyes widened in shock and a new emotion, fear mixed with respect. Asher smoothly stood up, freeing Kyle, who crawled backward on the floor, breathing heavily. Mike and Brett looked from Asher to their fallen friend, assessing the situation. They saw not a scrawny kid, but something entirely different. "Who are you, some kind of karate guy?" Brett asked, but his usual confidence had vanished, replaced by confusion. "Brazilian jiu-jitsu," Asher corrected him. "My dad was an MMA fighter. I've been training since I was 7. He rolled his shoulders, returning to a relaxed but ready stance. His body was loose, but every muscle was primed for action. "I could have fought at any moment for the last 3 months. I chose not to." Mike helped Kyle to his feet. Both now looked at Asher warily. Kyle rubbed his back where it had hit the floor, his face pale. "Take a swing." Brett said, trying to regain control, but there was no conviction in his voice. Go ahead, Asher invited. His voice was still calm, but there was a hint of steel in it. But you know, I'm tired of being to your punching bag. The next time any of you touch me, I won't hold back. Brett, not wanting to completely lose face, stepped forward. You think just because you pulled off one lucky move? Asher moved again, this time executing a perfect sweep that sent Brett stumbling toward the row of sinks. It wasn't a full throw, just enough to show that he could have done worse if he wanted to. Brett crashed into the sink, his elbow hitting the cold porcelain. That wasn't an accident, Asher said as Brett regained his balance, his face reddening with anger and embarrassment. Without warning, Asher began a combination of strikes and movements that didn't actually hit any of them, but demonstrated undeniable skill, the kind that comes with years of dedicated training. His hands moved along precise trajectories. His legs shifted with perfect balance. His body flowed through techniques that left no doubt about his capabilities. He moved like water, like a shadow, elusive and precise. He finished, returning to a neutral stance, not even breathing heavily. I could do this all day, he simply said. The bathroom door opened then, and all four guys turned to see Dean Thompson, the assistant principal, standing in the doorway. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the scene. Kyle, still rubbing his back. Mike, with dried blood under his nose. Brett, flushed and unsteady. And Asher, calm but clearly at the center of the confrontation. What's going on here, gentlemen? Dean Thompson demanded, his voice low and authoritative. A moment of tense silence ensued. Asher met Brett's gaze confidently, a quiet message passing between them. Now you know who I am, and you know what I can do. Nothing, Dean, Brett finally said. His voice was grim, devoid of its usual arrogance. We were just talking. Dean Thompson didn't look convinced. He scanned them, his brow furrowed. He was an experienced administrator and had seen enough to understand that something more than just a conversation had occurred here. But he had no direct evidence. No one was fighting, at least not now, and no one was complaining. You all should be in class. The warning bell rang 3 minutes ago. We were just leaving, Asher said, picking up his backpack from where it had fallen by the sinks. He approached the door, and the dean stepped back to let him pass. At the last moment, Asher turned to the three guys. See ya, he said, a simple statement carrying a meaning that only they understood. It wasn't a threat, but a statement of fact. The day flew by in a blur. News spread quickly, as it always did in high schools, where rumors traveled at wildfire speed. By lunchtime, the story had been distorted through multiple retellings. Some said that Asher knocked out all three guys with one punch. Others claimed he was some kind of underground fight club master who had just revealed his secret skills. The truth was much more complicated, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the result. When Asher entered the cafeteria, he noticed a subtle yet palpable change. The students who had previously ignored him were now watching him with curiosity, some even with reverence. Whispers followed him as he walked. He grabbed his lunch and headed to his usual secluded table, only to find Chloe already sitting there. She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "May I join?" he asked as he approached. "Of course," she said, her eyes shining. She studied him for a while. "So, the rumors are true. You dealt with Brett and his gorillas." "I just showed them what I could do, and apparently that was enough," Asher replied, feeling a slight relief. Chloe nodded, glancing across the cafeteria where Brett, Kyle, and Mike were sitting at their usual table, noticeably subdued and occasionally casting cautious glances in Asher's direction. "They've been terrorizing the guys for 2 years. No one has ever stood up to them like that. You did what no one dared to." "They crossed the line," Asher simply said. Unconsciously, he rubbed his neck where Brett's hand had pressed down. The memory was still fresh, but now it didn't evoke panic, rather a sense of determination. The week brought a new normal. Brett, Kyle, and Mike avoided Asher, crossing to the other side of the hallway when they saw him coming. Their gazes were averted, Their arrogance vanished. Other students who had previously ignored him now nodded in greeting or even tried to strike up a conversation. Asher began to notice faces that had previously blended into a mass. He even started smiling back. Over the next few days, Asher noticed that his life at school had changed dramatically. He was no longer the skinny newcomer. He was Asher, the guy who could stand up for himself while remaining calm and level-headed. His friendship with Chloe blossomed. They often had lunch together, and Chloe helped him adjust to the new school by telling him about different clubs and events. She even convinced him to join the chess club, where Asher discovered that his strategic thinking skills, honed on the mats, translated perfectly to the chessboard. "You're a natural strategist, Asher," Chloe said one day, watching him checkmate an experienced player. "You're always several steps ahead." In his father's studio, Asher continued to train, but now with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just honing his technique, he was seeking the balance his father had talked about. He learned to control not only his body, but also his emotions. "Control, son," Mark would say as they sparred. "It's not just about controlling your opponent, it's about controlling yourself." Asher began to apply this philosophy in his everyday life. He became more self-assured, but not arrogant. He learned to say no when he felt his boundaries were being crossed, but he did so calmly and respectfully. One day during gym class, Brett, Kyle, and Mike found themselves on his basketball's team again. The tension in the air was palpable. Asher expected them to continue their antics, but they were surprisingly quiet. Brett even passed him the ball a few times. At the end of the lesson, Brett approached Asher. "Good game, Hayes," he said, his voice a bit awkward. "You too, Asher Yabung," Asher replied, nodding. It was a small step, but it meant a lot. Life went on, bringing new challenges. One day, an article about bullying appeared in the school newspaper, written by an anonymous author. The article was powerful and emotional, describing the psychological consequences of bullying and urging students not to stay silent. Asher suspected it was Chloe's work. "Great article," he told her one day. Chloe smiled. "I just think it's something that needs to be talked about." Asher nodded. He knew that his story, although it ended well for him, was just one of many, and he was ready to use his newfound confidence to help others. He began attending school council meetings where issues of student safety and well-being were discussed. He didn't speak loudly, but his presence, his calm confidence, spoke for itself. He became a voice for those who were afraid to speak. He even started thinking about one day becoming a jiu-jitsu instructor, like his father. Not to teach people how to fight, but to teach them how to control themselves, stand up for their principles, and find the courage to be themselves. Because, as he learned, true strength was not about being the strongest, but about being yourself, even when it made you a target, and sometimes to show others what you are capable of, so they would never doubt again. Echoes of the past and new shadows. Months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and then to spring, bringing with it new scents, new sounds. The smell of freshly cut grass gave way to the scent of fallen leaves. Then damp snow, and finally, the first spring flowers. Asher Hayes was no longer the scared newcomer huddled in the corner. He stood tall, his gaze more assured, and his steps firmer. He was still tall and slender, but now there was a hidden strength in his posture, as if a steel rod ran through him. He was part of Northwood High, and it seemed that Northwood High had accepted him. His friendship with Chloe deepened with each passing day. They spent hours in the library, working on projects, discussing books and movies, laughing at silly jokes. Chloe was not just a friend to him, she was an anchor, a connection to a world he once feared. She introduced him to her circle. Liam, a tall, somewhat awkward guy with kind eyes, who was an absolute genius in programming, and loved tabletop role-playing games. And Sarah, a cheerful, energetic girl with a mane of red hair, who was the captain of the debate team and could argue with anyone about anything, her voice bright and confident. Asher found that he enjoyed their company. They didn't ask questions about his past, didn't try to uncover his secrets. They simply accepted him as he was. He felt part of something real, something that transcended the school hierarchy and superficial judgments. "You should come to our next game night," Liam said one day as they were having lunch in the cafeteria, his voice a bit shy. "We're playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's a lot of fun." Asher hesitated. He had never played such games. "I don't know. I'm not really into that." "Don't worry," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "We'll teach you. It's like chess, but with a lot more stories and monsters." Asher smiled. "Okay, sounds interesting." He went, and he really enjoyed it. He found that his strategic thinking, honed on the mats, was perfect for planning battles and solving puzzles in the fantasy world. He even began to suggest his ideas for the plot, surprising Liam with his creativity and logic. In his father's studio, Asher continued to train, but now with a new purpose. He wasn't just honing his technique, he was seeking the balance his father spoke of. He learned to control not only his body, but also his emotions, his reactions to external stimuli. "Control, son," Mark would say as they grappled, their bodies entwined in a complex dance, the sounds of their breathing filling the studio. "It's not just about controlling your opponent, it's about controlling yourself. Your fears, your anger, your pride." Asher began to apply this philosophy in his everyday life. He became more self-assured, but not arrogant. He learned to say no when he felt his boundaries were being crossed, but he did so calmly and respectfully. Once during gym class, Brett, Kyle, and Mike found themselves on his basketball team again. The tension in the air was palpable, like electricity. Asher expected them to continue their antics, but they were surprisingly quiet. Brett even passed him the ball a few times, avoiding direct eye contact. At the end of the lesson, Brett approached Asher. "Good game, Hayes," he said, his voice a bit awkward, almost shy. "You too," Asher replied, nodding. He felt that Brett was not just afraid of him, but also felt something like respect. It was a small step, but it meant a lot. Life went on, bringing new challenges. One day, an article about bullying appeared in the school newspaper, written by an anonymous author. The article was powerful and emotional, describing the psychological consequences of bullying and urging students not to stay silent, not to be indifferent. Asher suspected it was Chloe's work. "Great article," he told her one day as they walked down the hallway. Chloe smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I just think it's something that needs to be talked about. Too many people suffer in silence." Asher nodded. He knew that his story, although it ended well for him, was just one of many, and he was ready to use his newfound confidence to help others. He began attending school council meetings, where issues of student safety and well-being were discussed. He didn't speak loudly, but his presence, his calm confidence, spoke for itself. He became a voice for those who were afraid to speak. He even started thinking about one day becoming a jiu-jitsu instructor, like his father. Not to teach people how to fight, but to teach them how to control themselves. Stand up for their principles and find the courage to be themselves. Because, as he learned, true strength was not about being the strongest, but about being yourself, even when it made you a target. And sometimes to show others what you are capable of, so they would never doubt again. New shadows and unexpected allies. Despite the changes, life at Northwood High was not perfect. Brett and his gang no longer bothered Asher, but their presence was still felt, like a faint echo of the past. Mike seemed to have become even more withdrawn, his eyes often red, while Kyle started avoiding Brett, spending time with other guys. And Brett had changed. His arrogance had shifted to a kind of gloominess. He had become quieter, his laughter no longer echoed through the halls. Asher sometimes caught his gaze, and in it, he read something akin to shame, as if Brett carried an invisible burden. One day after classes, Asher was walking down the hallway when he heard shouting from the gym. The sounds of blows muffled by the walls caught his attention. He moved closer and saw Brett. He was standing against the wall, his head down, and in front of him stood a tall, muscular senior, Jake. Jake was known for his aggressiveness and was even more ruthless than Brett. his reputation preceded him. "Are you deaf, Harrison?" Jake growled, his voice full of contempt. "I told you to bring me the money by tomorrow." Brett lifted his head, his face pale, and his eyes full of fear. "I don't have it, Jake. My dad, he cut my allowance. I can't get it." "I don't care," Jake shoved Brett, making him crash into the wall with a dull thud. "You owe me, and you will pay, or I will make you regret being born." Asher froze. He saw the fear in Brett's eyes, the same fear he once felt himself. This was not his fight. Brett had been his tormentor, but something inside Asher wouldn't let him walk away. He remembered his father's words. Self-defense doesn't just mean when someone is swinging fists. Standing up for yourself can take many forms, and he recalled how he felt when he protected that boy in the hallway. Asher slowly stepped into the gym. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the empty space, drawing attention. Jake and Brett turned around. "What's going on here?" Asher asked, his voice calm but firm, without a hint of hesitation. Jake smirked, his lips stretching into an unpleasant grin. "And who are you, Skinny? Not your business." "Seems like it's my business," Asher replied, taking a step forward. "Leave him alone, Jake." Jake stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What are you, a hero? You think you can come in here and tell me what to do?" "I'm just telling you to leave him alone," Asher repeated. He stood calmly, his hands relaxed at his sides, but his body was ready for action. Like a taut string, Jake lunged at him. He was bigger and seemed stronger than Brett, but his movements were slow and predictable, full of unrestrained rage. Asher easily dodged the first punch, then the second, his body moving like water. He didn't strike back. He simply evaded, moving like a shadow, making Jake miss, his fists slicing through the air. Jake grew angrier, his punches becoming wilder and more uncontrolled. Asher continued to evade, his movements graceful and precise, as if he were dancing around an enraged bull. Finally, Jake lost his balance, his fist whistling past Asher's head. Asher seized the moment to step aside, causing Jake to stumble and fall to the floor with a dull thud, his body landing heavily on the wooden floor. Jake tried to get up, but Asher was already standing over him, his gaze firm, merciless, yet devoid of malice. "I don't want to fight, Jake, but if you keep this up, I won't hold back." Jake looked at him, his eyes filled with rage and confusion. He must have heard the rumors but didn't believe them. Now he saw. He got up, his face red, but he didn't make another move. "Fine," Jake growled, his voice a mix of impotent rage. "But this isn't over." He walked away, limping, his pride wounded, and his body likely aching. Asher turned to Brett. Brett was looking at him, his eyes wide, filled with disbelief and some new strange feeling. You saved me." "No one should have to go through that," Asher said. "If you need help, talk to Dean Thompson. He can help." Brett nodded, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "Thank you, Asher. Really." This incident changed the dynamic between Asher and Brett. Brett began to avoid Jake, and Asher sometimes saw him sitting alone, his gaze thoughtful. Asher didn't expect friendship, but he felt that something like an unspoken understanding had developed between them, fragile yet real. The tournament and the test of spirit. The annual Junior Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament was approaching in the neighboring town. Mark Hayes, Asher's father, was one of the organizers, and his studio was actively involved. "Are you going to participate, son?" Mark asked one evening as they sat down for dinner, the smell of home-cooked food filling the kitchen. Asher hesitated. He hadn't participated in tournaments since they moved. He was afraid it would draw too much attention, that it would disrupt his new, fragile normalcy that he had built for so long. "I don't know, Dad. What if you win?" Mark smiled, his eyes sparkling. "It's a great opportunity to test your skills, Asher, and it's a controlled environment. No street fights, just pure mastery." Chloe, who was sitting next to him, nudged him with her elbow. "You should go, Asher. It'll be amazing. I'll come and cheer for you." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Liam and Sarah also supported him. "We'll make posters," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes shining, "and bring Liam to document everything on video." Asher felt their support, their faith in him. He looked at his father, then at his friends. "Okay," he said, "I'll participate." The training became more intense. Asher spent every evening at his father's studio, honing his techniques, working on endurance, on every movement. Mark was a strict but fair coach. He pushed Asher to go beyond his limits, but always reminded him of the importance of control and respect. That true victory is victory over oneself. "Remember, Asher," Mark said as they sparred, their bodies moving in unison. "Jiu-jitsu is chess with the body. You must think several steps ahead and never underestimate your opponent. Respect him, but be ready." The tournament took place in a large sports complex located in the city center. The smell of sweat, sports mats, and something else that Asher associated with excitement and anticipation filled the air. Hundreds of teenagers from across the state gathered here to test their skills. Their voices buzzing, creating a backdrop of nervous excitement. Asher felt nervous, but also exhilarated. He saw his friends in the stands, their faces glowing with support. Chloe held a sign that read, "Go Asher," while Sarah waved a small flag. Liam sat nearby, preparing his camera. His first match was against a large, muscular guy named Todd. Todd was aggressive, his movements powerful but imprecise. He relied on brute strength. Asher used his speed and technique to evade his attacks, controlling his movements as if dancing around him. He felt his body moving on its own, as if it were programmed for victory. He executed several throws controlling Todd on the ground, but he didn't try to hurt him. He simply dominated, showcasing his superiority in technique. In the end, he won on points, and Todd, breathing heavily, acknowledged his defeat. His second match was against a more technical opponent who seemed to know all his moves, as if reading his mind. It was a tough fight that lasted until the very end. Every movement was precise, every grip mattered. Asher had to use all his knowledge and experience to secure the win. His muscles burned, but he did not give up. He felt fatigue, but also satisfaction from a job well done. In the semifinals, he faced a guy named Derek. Derek was known for his dirty style. He threw elbows, grabbed clothing, tried to inflict pain. His eyes were filled with malice. Asher felt anger boiling inside him. It was reminiscent of Brett, only on the mat, and it was even more provocative. "Control, Asher, control." His father's voice echoed in his head. He focused. He used his skills to block Derek's strikes, dodging his grabs. He did not respond to aggression with aggression. He simply controlled him, immobilizing him, depriving him of the ability to move, as if entangling him with invisible threads. He felt Derek getting angry, trying to break free, but Asher was unyielding, his grip ironclad. Eventually, the referee stopped the match, awarding the victory to Asher. Derek was furious but could do nothing. His face was twisted with rage. In the final, Asher faced a guy named Ryan. Ryan was a true master. His movements were smooth and precise, making him a worthy opponent. This was a fight that pushed Asher to give his all. Every muscle in his body was tense. They fought evenly, each trying to find the opponent's weak spot, like two predators. Asher felt his muscles burning, his lungs gasping for air, sweat streaming down his face. But he did not give up. He thought of his father's words, his friends, how far he had come, all the humiliations he had endured. In the final seconds of the match, Asher found an opportunity. He executed a quick, precise move that made Ryan tap out in submission. Victory! The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing throughout the sports complex. Asher raised his arms in triumph, his face slick with sweat, but a bright and genuine smile shone on it. He approached Ryan, extended his hand, and helped him up. "Good fight," Asher said, his voice a bit hoarse. "Me too," Ryan replied, his voice hoarse but devoid of malice. You earned it. At the awards ceremony, Asher stood on the podium, holding a gold medal, its cold metal pleasantly weighing down his palm. His father stood nearby, his eyes shining with pride, a broad smile playing on his face. Chloe, Liam, and Sarah were cheering and applauding from the stands, their voices the loudest. Asher felt on top of the world. He had proven to himself that he was not just the skinny new kid. He was a fighter and he was himself, the price of popularity and new lessons. Winning the tournament brought Asher a new wave of attention. He became a local celebrity. His name was in the school newspaper, his photos hung on the honor board, and his story was passed from mouth to mouth. Students who had previously ignored him now approached to congratulate him, ask questions about jiu-jitsu, and seek advice. Some even asked him to demonstrate a few moves. It was nice, but also a bit strange. Asher, who had always tried to be invisible, now found himself in the spotlight, every step he took being monitored. Some students, especially those who were popular, began to look at him with envy, their smiles strained. One day as Asher walked down the hallway, he overheard a group of girls whispering, "Look, it's Asher Hayes. He's so cool." "Yeah, but he's so quiet and a bit weird. He never goes to parties." Asher felt a sting. He was still the same Asher, but now he was being viewed differently, through the lens of his new reputation. He realized that popularity could be as heavy a burden as bullying. It carried its own expectations and pressures. Chloe noticed his pensive mood. They were sitting in the library, surrounded by the smell of old books. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Asher sighed. It's strange, all these people. They look at me differently. They expect something." "Well, you've changed, Asher," Chloe said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've become stronger, more confident, and people see that. Not everyone will be happy about it, but that's not your problem. Your problem is to stay true to yourself." She was right. Asher realized that he couldn't control what others thought, but he could control his reaction. He decided to remain himself, regardless of what others said or thought. He continued to train, continued to spend time with Chloe, Liam, and Sarah. He began helping his father at the studio, teaching younger students. His patience and calmness were invaluable. He found that he enjoyed sharing his knowledge, seeing others grow and develop, their eyes lighting up with understanding. One day during one of the training sessions, Brett approached him. He looked nervous, his hands clenched into fist. "Asher, can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice low. Asher nodded. "Of course." They stepped aside, away from the other students. Brett looked at him, his eyes filled with awkwardness and a new, unfamiliar humility. I want to apologize for everything I've done. I was a jerk. I know that's no excuse, but..." He paused, his voice trembling, his gaze fixed on the floor. "My dad, he always wanted me to be tough. He always pressured me, told me I had to be the best, that I had to be strong, that I shouldn't show weakness. And I thought bullying was a way to show that, a way to be who he wanted me to be." Asher listened, his heart tightening. He saw the pain in Brett's eyes, understood the pressure he was under. He understood. "I know that's not an excuse," Brett repeated, looking up, his eyes filled with despair. "But I want to change. Dean Thompson, he made me attend counseling, and it's helping. I'm starting to understand why I acted that way. I was unhappy, and I made others unhappy." "I appreciate that, Brett," Asher said. "I know it's not easy. Changing is always hard." Brett nodded. "I saw how you stood up for that younger kid and at the tournament. You're really cool, Asher. Not because you fight, but because you're different. You're strong, but you don't use your strength to hurt others." Asher smiled. "Thank you, Brett. Maybe you could show me a few moves?" Brett asked, his voice shy, almost childlike. "I want to learn to control myself, really. Not just others, but myself." Asher looked at him, It was an unexpected turn, but he saw sincerity in Brett's eyes, his desire to change. "Of course," he said. "Come to the studio. My dad will be happy to see you. And so will I." Brett smiled, and it was a genuine smile without a hint of arrogance, full of relief. "Thank you, Asher." "Really?" Dean Thompson in the fight for the school. Dean Thompson, a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes, was not just an administrator. He was a veteran of the school system, having witnessed many cases of bullying, and his heart ached for every student who suffered. He knew that the incident in the bathroom was just the tip of the iceberg. He had seen changes in Asher, in Brett, and that gave him hope. After the bathroom incident, Dean Thompson immediately called in Brett's parents, Kyle and Mike. These were not easy conversations. Brett's father, Mr. Harrison, was a tough, demanding man who did not believe in soft parenting methods. "My son is not a bully, Dean," Mr. Harrison growled, his voice loud. "He's just a boy who knows how to stand up for himself." "Mr. Harrison, your son choked another student until he lost consciousness," Dean Thompson replied calmly, his voice firm. "That is not standing up for himself. That is assault. And it is unacceptable." Dean Thompson presented them with evidence, testimonies from other students, surveillance footage, though not from the bathroom, but showing how Asher was dragged to it. Eventually, after long arguments, the parents agreed to suspension and counseling. Dean Thompson insisted that the counseling be conducted by an external specialist with experience in dealing with aggressive behavior rather than the school psychologist. He also began actively working on a new anti-bullying program. He saw that the old methods were not working. He needed help, and he knew whom to turn to. One day, he called Asher, Chloe, Liam, and Sarah to his office. The smell of coffee and old papers filled the air. "I've been watching you guys," Dean Thompson said, his voice serious. "You've changed the atmosphere in this school. Asher, you've shown that you can stand up for yourself without stooping to the level of your bullies. Chloe, your article in the newspaper was powerful. Liam, your programming skills can be very useful. Sarah, your debating skills can help us get our message across to others." He presented them with his idea to create a new, comprehensive anti-bullying program that would include seminars, support groups, an anonymous reporting system, and most importantly, teaching students how to be active witnesses rather than passive bystanders. "We want you to lead this initiative," Dean Thompson said. "You are the ones who can change this school." Asher and his friends agreed. It was a huge responsibility, but they were ready, the future and true strength. A year passed. Asher Hayes, now a senior, was a different person. He was confident, calm, yet remained kind and compassionate. He was a leader, but not one who dominates, rather one who inspires. His friendship with Chloe had blossomed into something more. They began dating, their relationship filled with tenderness, support, and deep understanding. They spent hours talking about their dreams, their fears, their future. They went on dates to the local ice cream shop, strolled through the park, watching the seasons change, their hands intertwined. The smell of freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery became a new symbol of peace and happiness for Asher. "You know, Asher," Chloe said one evening as they sat on the hill watching the sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. "You've changed this school. You've changed a lot of people." Asher smiled. I just was myself." "Exactly," Chloe said, snuggling up to him. "And that's the most important thing." Brett had become a regular at Mark Hayes' studio. He trained hard, his arrogance replaced by humility and respect. He no longer bullied anyone. He even started standing up for others, using his skills to diffuse situations rather than escalate them. He had become a different person, and Asher could see it. Sometimes they sparred, and Brett, although strong, always respected Asher, his technique, and his principles. Kyle and Mike, although they didn't join the training, had also changed. They became quieter, less aggressive. Mike started working out, and Kyle focused on his studies. They were no longer shadows of Brett. They were finding their own way. Asher and his friends, Liam and Sarah, became active members of the student council. They developed a new anti-bullying program that included workshops, support groups, and an anonymous reporting system. Liam created a special app through which students could report bullying incidents anonymously. Sarah delivered powerful presentations using her debating skills to convince students and teachers of the importance of combating bullying. Dean Thompson fully supported their initiative, providing them with all the necessary resources. The program was a tremendous success. The number of bullying incidents at Northwood High significantly decreased. Students became more open, more willing to talk about their problems. Asher and his team conducted workshops not only at their school, but also at other schools in the district, sharing their experiences and knowledge. "You've done more than any other student in all my years here, Asher," Dean Thompson said one day, his voice full of pride. "You've shown that one person can change a lot. You are a true leader." Asher planned to attend university to study psychology and sports science. He wanted to understand what drives people, what makes them hurt others, and how to help them find their way. He also planned to continue training and perhaps one day open his own studio to teach children not only jiu-jitsu, but also the philosophy his father instilled in him, a philosophy of control, respect, compassion, and true strength. He knew life wouldn't be easy. There would be new challenges, new trials. But now he was ready. He had found his strength, his true strength, which lay not only in his physical skills, but also in his inner core, his ability to show compassion, his ability to be himself. As he stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, Asher reflected on how quickly everything had changed. The bullies who had made his life miserable now either avoided him or sought his advice. The isolation he had felt had completely shattered as new relationships formed, deep and genuine. And most importantly, he discovered that standing up for himself didn't mean becoming a bully. It meant finding a balance between strength and restraint, between protecting himself and holding on to his principles. His father had been right all along. Self-defense was not just about hitting back when someone threw a punch. It was about knowing your worth and denying anyone the right to diminish it. It was about finding the courage to be yourself, even when it made you a target. And sometimes it was about showing others exactly what you were capable of so that they would never doubt you again. And this was just the beginning of his story.